Here we are looking at the Unit 1 worksheet. So in this worksheet, there are 6 artboards, each one focusing on a specific tool in Illustrator. Most of these tools should be reviewed. So let's just take a look first at the first artboard here. So essentially in this file, the idea is to copy or mimic the shapes that you see in the white area below in the artboard here. If you take a look at the layers panel, you will see there are 2 layers in here, instructor and student. So I'm going to lock the instructor layer, which has all of the objects on the artboards in the file, and we will be working on the student layer to be drawing out our vectors here. So the first tool is the review of the pen. So we're going to go and grab the pen tool up here in the top right-hand corner in the toolbar. And again, we're just going to be creating the shapes that we see here. So the idea is, again, just a review of working with the pen tool, which is basically the basis of Illustrator. So again, if we just check our fill and stroke color, I'm going to remove my fill that was set to white. And I'm going to just change my stroke to a different color here and make it a little bit thicker so that we can see. And now we'll start. So to drop an anchor point, just click with the pen. And then here we have the preview of the path that is showing up. So the first is just drawing an open path. So very simply just clicking to drop those anchor points that will create an open path. One little trick here is to release the pen. You can press Z, or you can press escape, or you can also press V, which will bring you back to the selection tool. Let's draw the next shape, which is the closed path. So again, I'm going to grab my pen tool. So a closed path is simply just a path that comes full circle that meets itself back at the beginning. I'm not going to be too precise here, but as long as we realize that if we click back on the first anchor point that we dropped, that will create a closed path. Going to the last one here, again, just a review of working with the pen tool and drawing straight lines or 45-degree lines. The trick is to hold down Shift. That will lock the path to be perfectly straight, either vertically or horizontally. So again, I'm just holding down Shift. And Shift if you're on an angle, that will give you a 45-degree angle. So that's just a review of the pen tool. That should be, again, something that you covered last term in Innovative Design. And then the next artboard here, we will start working with the pen and the curvature tool together. So these are all Bezier curves, and they can all be drawn different ways. So one thing that's really important is that when you are drawing these curves, that you are not doing something like this where you're, dropping the anchor point and then drawing another anchor point like this, and then doing a last one like that, right? So here I'm dropping 3 anchor points essentially. It works, but it's not the most efficient and effective way, and it can be quite difficult to get very smooth curves. Sometimes the anchor point in the top center of the curve can be a fault point in the shape, where you might see the joint there. So to create a very smooth curve like this, we can use the curvature tool as well as the pen tool to do that. So I'm going to show you the trick with the pen tool first. So what we want to do is click to drop our anchor point. Again, I'm still holding down my cursor, and I'm going to I'm dragging down in this case here. Okay, so, and then if I come over here to the right and click and drag up like that, I will draw a nice Bezier curve. So what I'm looking at is those two handlebars at the bottom of the shape there with the circles at the end, the red circles. If those are at the same level, then my curve will be relatively symmetrical. So you can see if I make one shorter than the other, my curve gets a little bit lopsided. So we want those two to be on the same level, and that will give us a nice straight, or not straight, obviously, but a nice, smooth, rounded, symmetrical curve. So let's do that one more time. This time I'm going to click and drag up at the same time. So again, I'm clicking and I'm holding down my mouse, and I'm also dragging it up at the same time. So it's not two separate motions, it's all one. Okay, then I release and then come over to the right and click and drag down. And again, there you can see there's my nice Bezier curve. So I can continue this pattern, which is basically what the second option is. So I'm continuing this as many times as I want. I can continue this and I would create those really nice curves there. So that's working with the pen tool. Again, it's once you get the hang of it, it's actually a lot easier and quicker to use. Another method is also just using the curvature tool to create this. So what you can do with the curvature tool is, I will do the second example with this. I can draw a straight line with the pen tool. So I basically dropped 3 anchor points, the first, second, and third, in a straight line like that. And then I can grab my curvature tool afterwards and bring it to the first segment here, and then let's push it up like that. And then I can do the same with the second. Okay, so sometimes you can work with the pen and the curvature tool together in order to create those curves as well, which I'll talk a little bit more about the curvature tool in the next slide or in the next artboard. The last one here is just showing you how you can create a 45-degree curve. So again, we're working with the pen tool for this one. So in this example, we would be clicking and dragging on a 45-degree angle like that. And then doing the exact same thing with the second anchor point. So again, clicking and just dragging on a 45-degree, you'll get that nice wave. So for each of these, you should be kind of drawing the shapes at the bottom and leaving them there. I am deleting them, but you should be leaving them there so that you can submit them. Okay, the next artboard here is working again with the same two tools, the pen and curvature. So I'm going to trace the apple. So with this artboard here, I'd like you to trace both of these logos. So I'm going to just do the apple, and then you can take a stab at the Nike logo afterwards. So for the apple, if I were to be tracing this, what I shouldn't be doing is using the pen tool and creating multiple small little segments like that. That is not the best way to be using these tools. We always want to strive for basically using the least amount of anchor points as possible, because number one, it's just faster not to be dropping down so many anchor points. And the second point is that when we have a lot of anchor points, we essentially get a lot of these joints that can be noticed, right? Things look a little bit more rigid. We might notice that there is a bend in the curve or a fault line in there. So we don't want to be working with multiple anchor points. So the least amount possible. So in order to do this, I could use the pen tool, but using the curvature tool is actually a lot quicker. So with the curvature tool, which is the fourth one here from the top, if I were to just start tracing this with the curvature tool, I would notice that it's kind of doing whatever it wants, right? It's not really following what I want it to do. It's not really letting me put the line where I want. So that's not really how the curvature tool works. The best way of working with it is to essentially drop some anchor points where you can see that curves end and begin. So I'm kind of just loosely going around the apple. So it's very abstract, obviously, right now. Once I go full circle and create a closed path with this odd shape, I can go back with the curvature tool and push and pull these paths where I want them to go. So here I can bring my curvature tool. I could basically just manipulate the lines and the anchor points to go where I want them to. I think I put too many anchor points down initially. I don't need all of these. You should be able to do this with about 8. So again, I'm just pushing these anchor points, like this one here isn't really necessary. Pushing these anchor points where they need to go. And I can push and pull the line. Okay, so again, it's a lot faster. You can really control where you want the line to go. So again, with the curvature tool, it creates nice, smooth curves without any joints that are noticeable. But the problem is obviously here, right? If I try to bring in that curve, it's not giving me a pointed edge. So in order to create that point or that change of direction in the curve, all you have to do is double click on the anchor point. So if I double click here, I'll get a point, and then same for this one there. Double click and I'll get a point. And then for the leaf on the apple, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then back. So we'll get an oval and double click on the top and double click on the bottom of the leaf. And there is the leaf. Okay, so on your own, you can try tracing the Nike logo, and you can use the curvature tool and or the pen tool in order to do that. Okay, let's go down here to the next tool, which is the width tool. So this tool here, what you can do is create custom profiles to your path or your stroke. You can do this with straight lines, curved lines, so straight lines, curved lines, and also closed shapes. So let's take a look at how this is done. So I'm going to use the pen tool to draw a line. You could also use the line segment tool as well. You could really use anything you'd like, essentially, just to create a stroke. It could even be a curved stroke. It doesn't really matter right now. So I'm going to draw a line like this. Okay. And there is my line. So let me make this a little bit bigger so that we can see, and maybe change the color to something a little bit more noticeable. Okay, so here is my path. So I'm going to use the width tool to basically manipulate this line. So the width tool is right over here in the toolbar. Okay, and you can even see from the little demonstration there what it does. So I'm going to grab my width tool and come to my path. So I can essentially, you can see it's activating itself here on my path. So I can click and drag down or in, essentially up or down, and I can manipulate the thickness of my stroke in that one particular area. So I can do this as many times as I want along my path, which is essentially how I created some of these shapes here. And I can also move these width plots along the line after the fact here. So that is how the width tool works. And again, I could do this as many times as I want along my path to create whatever kind of shape I want. So I can do that with an opened path, which are what these ones are here. So this is just a curve. These are just straight lines. And I can also do it with a closed shape, like an ellipse, for example. Okay, so just giving myself a little bit of weight on that stroke. And going to grab the width tool. See, I can make it thicker, thinner in multiple areas. So I really can control this in however many ways I would like to. Again, create some custom shapes. It can be really interesting, creating like sound waves or anything like that. There are a couple of them here that you'll notice they have a very, very rounded, almost like a ball at the end. So that is something that is a little trick that I'll show you how that can be created. So again, I'm going to use my pen tool to create my line. And when you are handing in this sheet, you can, as long as you're basically indicating that you can create these shapes, that is what we'll be looking for. They don't have to be in the same direction or anything like that exactly. So let's just create that here. Okay, so here's my shape. So you'll notice right now the stroke has very straight capped edges here. So if I go over to my properties panel and click on the stroke menu right here and choose the rounded cap option, which is the second and under the cap category, I will create rounded edges or rounded caps on my path. So essentially with the rounded cap and the width tool working together, I can create a very rounded edge to my stroke. And you kind of have to play with it a little. There it is. You kind of have to play with it a little bit to get the big ball at the end. It kind of just appears once I do that. Okay, so that's how these ones here were created. So that's the width tool. So again, really interesting stuff that you can do with that. The next two artboards are working with the Pathfinder and the Shape Builder tool, which somewhat work the same. Essentially, both allow you to add and subtract paths and shapes from one another. So they are both a little bit different in the way that they work, but essentially both have kind of the same principles. So the first is the Pathfinder tool. So we can use circles in order to work with this or whatever shape that you would like. So I'm going to draw out a circle. Okay, for this one here, I'm going to remove my stroke and add a fill color. Okay. So we want to have two shapes. We'll make them different colors. Okay. So with the Pathfinder tool, once you select the two shapes together, you should see the Pathfinder inside of the properties panel here, kind of towards the bottom. If you don't see it there, if you don't have your properties panel opened up, then you should be able to go to Window and Pathfinder. That will also bring up the Pathfinder menu. Okay, so let's play with this a little bit here. So when you're using the Pathfinder tool, you need to essentially select the shapes that you want to add or subtract together. And I'll just kind of show you how each of these work. So this would be adding shapes together. Okay. So you can see when I do that, I have two different colors. When I add them together, it adopts the color of the shape on top. So always important to remember. That's why I adopted the green color for both vectors, because the smaller circle was on top of the red one. To subtract, same idea. That will subtract the top shape from the one underneath. That doesn't adopt the same color because we're just subtracting them from one from another. Here, the next option is intersect, and that option there, what we will be left with is the intersecting area. So if I put these two closer together, select them both and choose intersect, the overlapping shape will be my result. And then the last option is the exclude, where it's basically the opposite of that one there. So I'll be excluding the shape that is above. So this one here, I'm going to add these ones back together. So we should have something like that. So that's the Pathfinder. It works really well if you're doing like large additions or like major subtractions. It can be quite quick to add things together versus the shape builder tool. The one thing that's pretty cool about the Pathfinder as well is that if I have something like this one here, for example, and when I added them together, it adopted the green color for the left and the right side, but let's say I still wanted to maintain the red color on the left, I can still do that. So I can basically use my direct selection arrow to only isolate the one side of this path. Essentially, it's a compound path. So I can use my direct selection arrow to just select the left side, and I could change that fill color to back to red if I wanted to. So it does the path finding, I guess we could say, but it also still maintains live edits. So I can still go back and edit them. So that's something that's good to know. The other thing that's great as well that you can do with the Pathfinder is add shapes together that are not touching or overlapping. So this would be great when you are creating logos, for example, and you wanted to make sure that, you know, a bunch of vectors were essentially grouped together or treated the same. Like if I change the color or something like that. So for instance, let's say this is one part of an icon for a logo, and I could group them together, but I could also select them all and use the Pathfinder to add them together. So again, they are still separate, but they act now like one shape. So when I move one or grab one and move it, they all move. If I change the color, they all change color. So they are essentially now what we call a compound path, separate shapes that are acting like one. Okay, and then the last artboard here is the shape builder. So for this one, I usually do a cloud that you will be creating just using a bunch of circles and a rectangle. So I'm going to create a cloud here. So I'm going to draw a bunch of ellipses here. They don't have to be all the same size, but they're going to be overlapping a little bit. Say like that. Okay. And then I'm going to also draw a rectangle at the bottom like that. Okay, so what I want to do is add all these circles together and basically subtract this straight rectangle edge from my cloud. So to do that, I'm going to select all of these shapes together. So that's what we should see. You should be able to see all of the segments and everything of the shapes that are overlapping with each other. And we're going to use the shape builder tool, which is this one over here above the gradient. Okay, so you can kind of see it there, how it's working in the little preview of the tool there. So when you click on the shape builder, it always wants to add initially. So you can even see on my cursor, there's a little plus sign beside it. So it's by default set to add. So if I click and just start touching all of these little shape segments, they will be added together and they kind of light up as soon as I go over them, and they'll all be added. So we want to add everything above the horizontal line. So all of these shapes we are going to be adding. And just to kind of show you here, right now this is all added together and I've created like a custom shape just by adding all that stuff together. But I can continue and to add I think I added too much. Let's go back here. So I'm going to continue to add till all of this is now together like that. Okay, so I could stop there, but just to kind of show you how this works with the subtraction option, I'm going to continue. So let me again grab all of my shapes. I'm going to add all these ones together. Okay, and then to subtract or erase all of the ones below, we need to hold down Option if you are on a Mac, or Alt if you're working with a PC. So Alt or Option, you can see my cursor is now changed to a minus sign. I'm holding down my Option key. And now once I click or drag on top of these points here, they will remove themselves from the shape builder. So we should be left with a cloud like that. And that is this week's worksheet.